I'm such a guy for the people. I go to the hotline right now because our dude Tom Hart's been waiting for a minute. Tom, good morning. How are you?
Where you been? What was happening?
So I went upstairs to tell our owners that Fernando Palomo's coming by. So, because he's a big deal. He's a big ESPN guy.
I thought maybe you had to put another quarter in the parking meter or something.
Well, recently it feels like I have to go pay for parking because the students are back. All of our parking's gone, and there's construction across the street at the practice facility. There's been very limited parking recently, Tom.
The problems of the wealthy. I tell you what, if you just have somebody valet for you like Lucci does, then it would be less of an issue.
Lucci's gets a spot that says Lucci in big letters, and you're not allowed to park there unless you're Billy.
By the way, he's now a big movie star. I finally got around to watching the Manziel doc, and I told him, I said the highlight wasn't just seeing Lucci in present day; it was seeing old school Lucci,
right?
The sit-down interview with Sumlin in the middle of these press conferences. I laughed really hard when I saw him.
You had young Lucci, young Gabe, and young Olin all in the same video.
So beautiful.
You know what's interesting? People are like, you know that guy? Like now since Netflix, right? Netflix happens, people are like, you know Billy? I was like, dude, I've known Billy for 25 years. Yes, I know Billy.
That's a really silly question because everybody knows Billy. But yeah, I can see Netflix is now reaching a wider audience. I love the show, man. It was a fun retrospective. I love seeing the highlights. I'm sorry, they're doing some yard work. I'm going to move. It's probably too loud where I am right now.
I don't hear a thing.
You good? You can't hear it?
I don't hear anything, yeah.
All right, well, let's go for a walk anyway.
I love your patio. Did we lose Tom? Wow. Internet, he goes in the house, and we lose Tom Hart. That's all right. We'll get him back here in a minute.
Am I gone?
No, you were gone for a moment. I was a little worried.
Oh, my gosh.
All good.
Well, apparently the internet can't keep up with my speed. I'm just too fast for the Wi-Fi. That's how quickly I was moving. No, I love the retrospective. I love seeing Johnny play football. I love hearing him tell his story. I thought there's some really in-depth answers that he gave that deserved more, investigation, more questions, more thoughtfulness from the producers. I just wanted to see more. I wanted to see another 3 episodes. I wanted to see more of the playing. I wanted to see that Duke game, the Peach Bowl that we talked about. I wanted to hear from teammates. I wanted to see more of the NFL stuff. I wanted to hear more of the fallout from friends that he left behind once he went to prepare for the combine. But it was a fascinating hour 20, whatever it ended up being.
Something tells me it's not the last Johnny Manziel documentary that we see, and there'll be a different one in 4 or 5 years. It'll be a little bit longer, and it'll go into some of that stuff. I feel like when it's that good, there's more out there.
Yeah. Well, there's an audience for it. I mean, I had forgotten just how big of a celebrity he was in the moment, right? Because I've seen him since in College Station and at games and hung out with him just a little bit with Lucci. And he's not treated like a superstar, like a normal dude walking through Southgate or wherever. But thinking back to that time and what a meteoric rise it was, a combination of so many different things, I don't know that it can be replicated,
Yeah. Talking to Tom Hart here on TexAgs Radio. All right, Tom, we actually got games this weekend, finally. So my question, are you interested in the game in Dublin? I mean, to me, I think I'd watch that game anyway, but it's the first game that we get to see.
What time are they kicking off?
I think it's a 1:30 game. I might be wrong about the first game, but I think it is one of the first games we see.
I think it's the best game in the schedule for week 0. By the way, going forward, my prediction, and I don't think I'm going out on a limb here, is week 0 is no longer going to look like week 0, especially with USC and UCLA going to the Pac-12 and with Oregon and Washington. They're going to have to build in more bye weeks because of travel. And I think they'll get some exceptions to play week 0 games. Historically, it's been you have to get an exception, or if you're playing Hawaii, you get an extra week because of travel. Playing Hawaii anytime during the course of the season. But I think we're going to stretch this college football season out. Notre Dame and Navy is a highlight. I want to see what Vanderbilt looks like. They destroyed Hawaii last year on the road with Mike Wright playing quarterback. He ran all over them. It was they changed quarterbacks later. They didn't look like the same team. But I'm just excited to have football back.
Yeah, I am too. There is, I wouldn't say as much interest, but I am interested in USC and San Jose State. Because, you got your Heisman Trophy winner who a lot of people think is going to win his second one. I want to see if that defense has gotten any better because that was their Achilles heel last year. They picked up some guys in the transfer portal. I'm interested in that one too.
Yeah, I'm naturally curious about USC. I mean, to me, it's going to sound weird, but USC and Oklahoma will always go hand in hand. I mean, what they took from Oklahoma, head coach, quarterback, just and this, I don't know if it's too much to say, but like this, it's like they robbed them of their ego overnight when everybody left for Tinseltown. And I think Oklahoma can get back there. I think they're going to have a much better year this year. But as long as Lincoln Riley's at USC, and especially with Caleb Williams there, I'm going to view USC and Oklahoma like on parallel tracks. What one does seems to impact how we think about the other, or how I think about the other. But that's the day and age we live in the transfer portal. I mean, Auburn's starting Peyton Thorne at quarterback week 1. They basically stole him from Michigan State. He set the passing record at Michigan State a couple of years ago, breaking Kirk Cousins' record, a 2-year starter. And I don't know for sure. I don't know if he was going to be the starter or not this year. He got good competition in the spring. But he's like, yo, I'm out. And he bounces to Auburn, and he's their starting quarterback. And so I think that a lot of fans are going to look. It's kind of like when your favorite player or anybody gets traded or leaves via free agency in the NFL. Now it's like, all right, well, that used to be our guy. Now I'm curious what he's doing in that new stop.
Yeah, I agree with that. I want to ask you about A&M because at some point we think in the next few days or next week we'll find out who the starting quarterback is. And I think we all have our opinions who that'll probably be. That all being said, the players on the team, they're not waiting for an announcement. I think they know, you just see it. Am I right about that? The players just know by the way the reps are going and the way the quarterbacks are leading the way. It's not like it's a TBD for them.
You bring up a good point. My one counter to that is, and by the way, A&M's not the only place going through it. I think Alabama going through the same thing. I'll have them week 1. So, that's a conversation for Nick Saban on our production meeting is how much of it is tied to, and every head coach I think is asking this question, how much of it is tied to performance and how much of it is tied to leadership? And are they always intertwined? Because players know who performs best in scrimmages, in practices, wide receivers know who they like getting the ball from, running backs know who gives them the best look, all of that stuff. But there are sometimes surprises. There are sometimes clicks in the locker room that don't carry as much weight with the coaching staff, and they go a different direction. I kind of think that Georgia, Kirby caught a lot of grief a few years ago when he was trying to figure out what he was doing at quarterback, and they end up with Fromm, and Justin Fields ends up bolting and being immensely talented and showing that off. There's no doubt in my mind that there are guys in that Georgia locker room who thought that Jake Fromm shouldn't have been the starter, and that liked playing with the other guy better. But sometimes coaches make a decision that goes against the locker room. It doesn't happen very often, and it probably doesn't happen against a majority of the locker room. But I think that's where all the anxiety comes from.
Talking to Tom Hart here on TexAgs Radio, presented by David Gardner's Jewelers. All right, let's talk about these new quarterbacks in the conference because you mentioned Peyton Thorne. But there's a lot of guys coming from different places. You got a couple Big Ten quarterbacks that are in the league. You've got Graham Mertz out there. You got Peyton Thorne. You also have Devin Leary. Kind of break down your thoughts on these guys and how they will get acclimated to the SEC.
Well, no transfer quarterback is the same because they're not stepping into the same situation, right? It's not a vacuum. If all of these guys ended up on the same roster, then we tried to compare A to B to C, that'd be one thing. But Graham Mertz is stepping into a situation, talking with people down in Gainesville, where the roster from a talent standpoint just isn't where it needs to be. And he probably gives them a stabilizing force and a more consistency, and that's going to be necessary for them. Devin Leary goes into Kentucky with a young trio at wide receiver that are maybe the most underrated in the league. And I think they'll get a chance to come into their own this year. They had some growing pains last year. Their offensive line at Kentucky wasn't very good. And the play calling was suspect. Now, it's easy to hold a coordinator accountable when the offensive line stinks. And they were terrible. So they've got to get better at O-line. But they bring Liam Cohen back. They had him 2 years ago. He had yo-yoed between Kentucky and the Rams. And I think that's going to be a better offense just overnight with all of those pieces. And so in my mind, Devin Leary has the chance to be the transfer quarterback that makes the most noise, especially early on. I mean, they've got some games where he can put up some big numbers. I think people are going to look at that and go, wow, that was the signing of the offseason. The question becomes, is the O-line good enough? Are the wide receivers proven enough? We know they have very high ceilings, proven enough to win the big games. Non-conference games are one thing. Can they knock off Georgia? Do they have the firepower to do that? And then I think he'll prove that indeed he was the best signing of all these transfer quarterbacks in the offseason.
Tom, I think that's an excellent point, and that's why earlier in the show we had this topic on teams that at the end of the year I'd believe, yeah, that's a 10-win team, but I also would believe they're a 7-win team, right? If you told me that at the end of the year, I think Kentucky fits that bill because of some of the talent that they have, the quarterback situation, the high end of being 10, but also because that offensive line, I could also believe 7.
Well, here's my comparison for the day. You ever play golf when it's really hot out and you're having a bad round? Like, it's 100 degrees, you're tired, you're sweaty, and you're doing okay. Then you play poorly. And then your last 4 holes, you're like, I don't care. Let's just end it. Like, get me in there to get me a cold beer or whatever, or get me back in the air conditioning so I can go home. That happens in college football, especially teams that had high expectations and they don't deliver. They lose a couple of games. The last third of the season, let's just play it out. Let's just finish this thing. And there's a lot of different examples where you could point to and say, I think that's what happened with this team. I think that's what happened with that team. But let's go back to Jim McElwain's final season at Florida. They gave up. They had a game at Missouri in early November. It was cold. It was an early kick. Weren't a lot of people there. And talking to guys in the team the next year, they said, yeah, we quit. We're just done. We knew our coach was gone. We mailed it in that day. We mailed it in the rest of the season. And I bring that up because it happens more often than we want to think, number one. And number two is if you can sustain, you don't have to be elite, but if you can just sustain, there are wins available in the back third of the schedule that just come from attrition. Not every week and not every team, but we'll see. There'll be some teams that are average to poor that just mail it in on the back end. And we've seen that with our own eyes, even though you can't pinpoint it until somebody admits it. And it's usually well after the fact that they do. But it's a long season, man, and it can be mentally draining on everybody within a program.
Tom, is there another team beyond Kentucky that you see that fits that criteria of, at the end of the year, I could see them winning 7. I could absolutely see them winning 10. Is there another one out there? I feel like that's life in the SEC for the most part, but maybe this year in particular.
The margins are so thin, right? I mean, the margins are so thin between winning and losing in any game, and then the momentum. It'd be really hard. Well, I think you could pick a bunch of teams in the West and say, okay, either 7 or 10. Because that division is so loaded. Like if Auburn's got great running backs, they're due for a bounce back year. Peyton Thorne is as good as possible, then they could be a 10-win team. I could say the same about Ole Miss. Either one of those could fall back and be a 7-win team. I mean, I think those are the two most obvious. KJ Jefferson stays healthy. Arkansas could put up some big numbers. I mean, that guy is incredibly talented. If he doesn't get much support around him, they could be a 6-win team. So, yeah, I think just about anybody in the West, based on the ebb and flow, obviously anybody not named LSU at Alabama where the stakes are so high and the expectations are so high. But the ebb and flow of a given season and the role that health plays into it, there's a lot of different teams on that side. South Carolina would be one more. They lost a lot, especially on the defensive end, but I'm a believer in Shane Beamer. I'm a believer in Spencer Rattler based on how he ended last season. And now they got a new offensive coordinator, and that's going to simplify things, make them more like they were at the end of the year. versus what Marcus Satterfield had him trying to do for the first half of the season.
South Carolina is one that I believe in their potential, but I look at their schedule. I'm like, man, they got so many tough games to open up the year. I think they could have 3 losses to start, and then it becomes, do they become that example you gave earlier, or like, I don't even know if it's worth it this year, right? Like how they weather the Georgia game early on. I think Georgia, Tennessee, they have a very tough September. How they weather through that will determine the rest of their year.
I think they're due to get off to a better start in the sense that, and we talked about this in our production meetings with South Carolina last year. Spencer Rattler was running an offense that he had never run before, and there was a lot on his plate. I mean, he looked like me the morning of the ACT. Like every Friday we talked to him, it was like, I don't know what this math section is going to give me fits. And then they were able to realize, like, hey man, we need to make our quarterback more comfortable, and they got to that point. That's what makes this league so fascinating. I mean, college football as a whole, yes, but the SEC specifically is that there's so much talent here. And a lot of that talent, like the Auburn situation, they steal Michigan State's quarterback, has come from elsewhere and only made the league better. The fine line between having a season where you puff your chest out and you crow about it and you go, man, we're building something really great, versus, hey, we just survived and I don't know how many guys we're going to have for the bowl game, but let's get back in that transfer portal. Whew. That is every coaching staff out there is riding that ridge, and they ride it all season long.
Talking to Tom Hart here on TexAgs Radio, presented by David Gardner's Jewelers. So Carson Beck officially named the starter this weekend. A lot of hype around him. I get it. I mean, he was Mr. Football, right? Like there's a lot of reasons to buy the hype, but there are questions because he hasn't done it. The one thing I'll give Kirby was he did insert him quite a bit last year to get him those reps. What do you think about Carson Beck this year with Georgia?
Yeah, he played in 7 games last year, played in the national championship. But all those games had already been decided. He's going to spend more time in the pocket than Stetson Bennett did. I thought one of the things that constantly, I think, surprised people about Stetson Bennett was his willingness and ability to leave the pocket and to put his body on the line and to get out there. I don't think Carson Beck is going to be doing a ton of that. I think he's going to be a willing runner, but here's the thing with Georgia right now. They have a deep backfield, but they don't have yet that elite guy. Now, lucky for them, right? No Oklahoma on the schedule this year. In the non-conference, their schedule got immensely easier almost overnight. They'll have plenty of time to figure out exactly who they are. And Beck will have plenty of time to play in games where he can get his feet underneath him. Knows the offense well. He's got experience. I think Brock Vandagriff is a guy that can still do stuff for him. And Gunnar Stockton, the younger guy, is a 5-star, potential through the roof. I would say that from a talent perspective, I'm inclined to say, hey, we may see multiple guys throughout the course of the season. But Kirby really hasn't been that guy. I mean, he got Beck playing experience behind Stetson last year because it was the right thing to do and it made sense. I think he's probably going to be a 1 quarterback guy, even though I could make a case that they'd be better off by rotating a couple of those guys through, especially the youngsters, especially their redshirt freshman Gunnar Stockton.
Tom, appreciate it, man. Got to hit a break. Thank you very much. Talk to you next week.
Hi, David.
See you, bro.
See you, bud.